Carl Jung explained, "The divine purpose, hiding in your deepest wounds." In 1912, Carl Jung made a discovery so dangerous to conventional psychology that he kept it hidden in his private journals for decades. What he found wasn't just revolutionary, it was heretical to everything we'd been taught about human suffering. Jung discovered that your deepest wounds aren't accidents. They aren't punishments from an uncaring universe. They aren't evidence that you're broken or damaged beyond repair. Your wounds are the exact places where your soul's divine purpose is trying to break through into consciousness. While treating a patient who had endured severe childhood abandonment, Jung observed something that defied every textbook he'd ever studied. The precise nature of her trauma, the way she was left, the age it happened, the specific emotional devastation she experienced, corresponded exactly to the unique healing gift she was destined to bring to the world. Her wound of abandonment had sculpted in her an extraordinary capacity for creating unshakable bonds. Her nervous system, forever altered by the terror of being left, had developed supernatural sensitivity to when others felt unsafe or unwanted. What she thought was her greatest weakness was actually her most powerful gift. Jung called this the wound gift paradox, the earth-shattering realization that our deepest suffering contains the seed of our greatest service to humanity. This wasn't spiritual bypassing. This wasn't toxic positivity telling you to be grateful for your trauma. This was documented psychological observation across hundreds of cases, revealing a hidden pattern that most therapists never recognize. Jung discovered that the psyche operates with an intelligence so profound it uses even our most devastating experiences as raw material for developing our most essential capacities. The unconscious doesn't waste anything. Every wound serves the emergence of consciousness. Modern trauma research has now validated Jung's forbidden insights. Post-traumatic growth research shows that people often develop enhanced abilities in the exact areas where they experienced their deepest wounding. Those who survive life-threatening illness frequently develop profound gifts for helping others face mortality. Survivors of betrayal become masters at recognizing authentic character and creating trustworthy relationships. The wounds that feel most senseless, most cruel, most unfair, these are often the places where divine purpose is trying to emerge through the cracks in our psychological armor. But here's what Jung realized that will change everything. We don't heal from our wounds. We heal through them, discovering that what we thought was destroying us was actually the divine chisel sculpting our soul's unique contribution to the world's healing. Your greatest wound isn't your greatest obstacle to purpose. It is your purpose, waiting to be discovered and embodied. The question isn't, how do I get over this? The question is, what is this preparing me for? But here's the tragedy Jung witnessed everywhere he looked. We live in a culture of sacred wound denial. We've been trained to see our deepest psychological wounds as meaningless suffering rather than recognizing them as the birthplace of our most essential gifts. Most people spend their entire lives locked in one of two equally destructive patterns. Either they desperately try to heal their wounds by making them disappear, or they become so identified with their wounds that they can't imagine themselves without their suffering. Both approaches miss the profound third option that Jung discovered hidden in plain sight. The problem isn't the wounds themselves. The problem is our fundamental misunderstanding of their function in psychological and spiritual development. Jung observed that individuals who try to get over their deepest wounds often find themselves feeling mysteriously empty and purposeless. They achieve what they thought they wanted, freedom from pain, only to discover they've lost touch with something essential about themselves. They've healed themselves right out of their calling. These people become what Jung called the successfully adjusted, individuals who've eliminated their psychological pain but lost access to their authentic nature in the process. They function well in society, but they've traded their soul's fire for social acceptability. On the other side, Jung witnessed people who become so identified with their wounds that they trap themselves in permanent victim consciousness. They wear their trauma like armor, using it to explain why they can't fully engage with life. Their wounds become their identity, their excuse, and their prison all at once. These individuals never discover the gifts that want to emerge through their suffering because they're too busy protecting their wounds or proving how much they've suffered. But Jung discovered something even more sinister. Our wounds contain what he called the rejected treasure, aspects of our authentic self that were wounded precisely because they were so valuable and threatening to unconscious family or cultural systems. The sensitive child gets wounded for their sensitivity, not because sensitivity is bad, but because it threatens family systems built on emotional numbness. The creative child gets shamed for their creativity, not because creativity is wrong, but because it challenges conventional thinking. The intuitive child learns to hide their gifts, not because intuition is dangerous, but because it sees through family lies and social facades. When we don't understand the purpose hidden in our wounds, we make one of two fatal errors. We either abandon the very qualities that make us unique, or we protect them so fiercely that they never get to fulfill their intended function in the world. Jung recognized that modern psychology's obsession with symptom removal actually prevents individuals from discovering their deepest calling. By trying to eliminate psychological pain, we often eliminate the very sensitivity and awareness that our wounds developed in us. The medical model treats wounds like diseases to be cured rather than sacred territories to be explored for their hidden treasures. We medicate away our sensitivity instead of discovering how it serves. We therapy away our intensity instead of learning how to channel it. We positive think away our darkness instead of mining it for the gold it contains. This is why so many people feel lost and purposeless, even after years of healing work. They've been trying to fix what was never broken. They've been trying to eliminate what was meant to be transformed. The tragedy isn't that we get wounded. The tragedy is that we fail to recognize our wounds as sacred territories where our soul's purpose is waiting to be discovered, integrated, and expressed in service to something greater than our personal healing. Jung saw that when we deny the sacred nature of our wounds, we lose access to our most profound gifts. We become spiritually homeless, disconnected from the very experiences that were meant to awaken our deepest capacities for service and love. In 1915, Jung began treating a 28-year-old woman named Margaret, whose life read like a catalog of abandonment trauma. Her father died suddenly when she was 5, leaving her mother so overwhelmed with grief that she emotionally withdrew into a depression that lasted years. Margaret remembered standing at her mother's bedroom door, desperately trying to get her attention, but her mother had become a ghost in her own home. When her mother couldn't care for her anymore, Margaret was shuffled between relatives who saw her as a burden, then eventually placed in a series of foster homes where she never felt truly wanted or secure. By the time she reached Jung's office, Margaret was convinced she was fundamentally broken when it came to relationships. She had developed a devastating pattern. Just when someone got close to her, she would unconsciously sabotage the relationship by becoming clingy and demanding, or by pushing them away before they could abandon her first. "I destroy everything I touch," she told Jung during their first session. "I'm poison to anyone who tries to love me." Margaret came to therapy believing her abandonment wound made her incapable of forming lasting bonds. She saw her hypervigilance around rejection as pathology. She interpreted her intense need for reassurance as weakness. She viewed her emotional sensitivity as evidence that she was too damaged to ever have healthy relationships. But Jung began noticing something extraordinary that Margaret couldn't see about herself. During their sessions, Jung observed that Margaret had developed an almost supernatural ability to sense when others were feeling abandoned or rejected. She could recognize the signs of emotional withdrawal in people before they were even conscious of it themselves. She had an instinctive knowledge of exactly what to say and do to help someone feel secure and valued. When Jung's other patients mentioned feeling lonely or unwanted, Margaret would instinctively offer precisely the kind of reassurance and attention that could penetrate their defenses. She knew exactly how to create safety for people who had been hurt because she understood their terror from the inside. Jung realized that Margaret's wound of abandonment had actually developed in her a profound gift for creating the very security she had never received. Her nervous system, forever altered by the experience of being left, had become exquisitely attuned to attachment dynamics. She could read the subtlest signs of emotional distress and respond with exactly what wounded hearts needed most. "Your abandonment wasn't a curse," Jung told her during a breakthrough session. "It was your calling being carved into your soul." Margaret's transformation began when Jung helped her understand that her hypersensitivity to abandonment wasn't pathology. It was her divine radar for detecting when others needed the security she had learned to create. Her wound hadn't broken her capacity for connection. It had developed capacities for connection that most people never possess. Through their analytical work together, Jung guided Margaret to see that every foster home experience had taught her something essential about what children need to feel safe and wanted. Every abandonment had refined her sensitivity to others' fear of being left. Every rejection had strengthened her commitment to ensuring others felt truly valued. Margaret began experimenting with consciously using her wound-derived gifts. Instead of hiding her sensitivity to abandonment, she started recognizing it as valuable information about others' emotional states. Instead of seeing her intense loyalty as neediness, she began understanding it as a rare capacity for commitment that could heal others' trust wounds. The transformation was dramatic. Margaret discovered that when she served others from her integrated wound, offering security to the abandoned, loyalty to the betrayed, acceptance to the rejected, she felt more authentically herself than ever before. Her wound stopped feeling like a liability and became her greatest asset. Margaret eventually became a pioneering social worker who revolutionized approaches to foster care. She used her intimate knowledge of abandonment to create healing environments for displaced children, developing programs that helped wounded children transform their own pain into gifts. Her revolutionary insight was that abandoned children didn't just need homes. They needed to discover how their abandonment was preparing them to create unshakable security for others. Her programs became models internationally, helping thousands of children discover purpose in their pain while healing their trauma. Jung documented Margaret's transformation as proof of his most radical insight. Our wounds aren't obstacles to our calling. They are our calling, waiting to be consciously integrated and expressed in service to healing. Margaret wrote in her journal years later, "I finally understand that I was never truly abandoned. I was being prepared. Every loss was teaching me how to help others never feel as alone as I once did. My wounds weren't punishment. They were my purpose being sculpted through suffering." Her story demonstrates that the very experiences that seem to destroy us are often the experiences that prepare us for our most essential service to the world. What Jung discovered in his private practice over a century ago has now been validated by groundbreaking research that confirms his most radical insights about the hidden purpose in human wounding. Dr. Richard Tedeschi's revolutionary research on post-traumatic growth has documented exactly what Jung observed. Individuals don't just recover from trauma, they often develop enhanced capacities in the precise areas where they experienced their deepest wounds. Tedeschi's studies show that survivors of life-threatening illness frequently develop profound appreciation for life's preciousness and extraordinary ability to help others face mortality with grace. Their brush with death doesn't just leave them grateful, it transforms them into guides for others walking through their own dark valleys. Cancer survivors become the healers who can sit with dying patients in ways that no medical training could teach. Heart attack survivors develop intuitive wisdom about what truly matters that they couldn't have accessed without facing their own mortality. Dr. Rachel Yehuda's groundbreaking research on epigenetics has revealed something even more extraordinary. Traumatic experiences actually alter gene expression in ways that can enhance resilience, empathy, and stress recovery capabilities. Our wounds literally rewire our DNA to develop specific strengths that serve not just our own survival, but our capacity to help others survive similar challenges. The field of positive psychology has documented what researchers call benefit finding, the mysterious tendency for individuals to discover meaningful purpose and enhanced capabilities emerging directly from their most difficult experiences. This isn't just making the best of a bad situation. This is discovering that the bad situation was preparing them for something essential. Dr. Ann Maston's research on resilience has shown that children who overcome significant adversity often develop what she terms ordinary magic, extraordinary capacities for helping others navigate similar challenges. These children don't just survive their wounds, they develop superpowers through them. The research on wounded healers in therapy professions consistently shows that therapists' personal wounds, when properly integrated, become their greatest assets in helping clients heal from similar trauma. Therapists who have successfully navigated depression become extraordinarily skilled at guiding others through depressive episodes. Those who have healed from addiction develop almost mystical ability to recognize and interrupt addictive patterns in others. Neuroimaging studies reveal something profound. Individuals who have transformed their wounds into service show increased activity in brain regions associated with empathy, meaning-making, and social connection. Their brains have been literally rewired for compassion and service through the process of integrating their suffering. Dr. Viktor Frankl's logotherapy research demonstrated that finding purpose in suffering literally changes brain chemistry and enhances psychological resilience. When people discover meaning in their pain, their entire neurological system reorganizes around that meaning, creating enhanced capacity for both personal healing and service to others. Studies on altruistic behavior show that people who have experienced significant trauma and successfully integrated it are more likely to engage in helping behaviors, volunteer work, and caregiving professions. Their wounds become the foundation for a life of service. Recent research on altruism born of suffering reveals that traumatic experiences, when processed consciously, create what researchers call empathic concern, enhanced ability to recognize and respond to others' suffering with effective help rather than just sympathy. The neuroscience of compassion shows that individuals with integrated trauma history show different brain activation patterns when witnessing others' pain. Their mirror neuron systems are more highly developed, allowing them to feel and understand others' suffering with greater accuracy and respond with more effective intervention. All of this research points to the same profound conclusion that Jung reached through careful observation. Our wounds aren't random accidents that we must overcome. They are precise experiences that develop specific capacities needed by a world full of wounded people seeking healing. The scientific validation is clear. Our deepest wounds aren't obstacles to purpose. They are the very mechanism through which purpose emerges, creating in us exactly the gifts that our suffering world most desperately needs. Through decades of analytical work, Jung identified 7 primary categories of sacred wounds, each containing a specific type of divine purpose waiting to emerge. Understanding your wound type is crucial for discovering the unique gifts your suffering was meant to develop. The abandonment wound creates individuals with extraordinary capacity for loyalty, commitment, and creating lasting bonds. Those wounded by abandonment carry in their nervous systems the terror of being left, which develops in them supernatural sensitivity to when others feel unsafe or unwanted. These individuals become the world's most dedicated partners, parents, and community builders. They have instinctive knowledge of what it takes to make others feel truly secure because they know intimately what insecurity feels like. Their wound of abandonment transforms into a gift for creating unshakable belonging. Margaret, the woman we discussed, exemplifies this transformation. Her abandonment wound became her superpower for creating foster care environments where displaced children could heal. She could spot a child's abandonment terror from across a room and knew exactly how to create safety. The betrayal wound develops profound wisdom about trust, integrity, and authentic relationship. Those deeply betrayed by people they loved and trusted often become gifted at recognizing genuine character, creating safe spaces for vulnerability, and helping others navigate complex relational dynamics with discernment and skill. Their betrayal taught them to read between the lines, to sense when someone's words don't match their energy, to recognize the difference between performance and authenticity. What felt like devastating naivety becomes sophisticated emotional intelligence. These wounded healers become relationship therapists, mediators, and guides who help others discern who is safe to trust and how to rebuild faith in human goodness after betrayal. They can spot manipulation that others miss because betrayal trained their perception. The rejection wound births fierce advocates for the marginalized and misunderstood, those who experience deep rejection for their sensitivity, their difference, their authentic nature, often develop extraordinary compassion for anyone who doesn't fit in. Their wound of rejection becomes a gift for creating inclusion. They become the leaders who ensure everyone has a voice, the advocates who fight for the underdog, the healers who specialize in helping people embrace their authentic nature instead of conforming to others' expectations. These individuals often become counselors for LGBTQ+ individuals, advocates for neurodivergent people, or leaders in social justice movements. Their own experience of being rejected for who they were creates unstoppable commitment to ensuring others never feel that pain. The powerlessness wound creates natural empowers and justice advocates, individuals who experienced helplessness through abuse, oppression, or systemic disadvantage often develop unshakable commitment to ensuring others never feel as powerless as they once did. Their wound of powerlessness becomes a gift for empowerment. They become the leaders who lift others up, the activists who challenge oppressive systems, the coaches who help people reclaim their personal sovereignty. They can't tolerate seeing others suffer from powerlessness because they remember how it felt. Many social justice leaders, women's rights advocates, and empowerment coaches carry this wound type. Their experience of helplessness becomes their fuel for creating power and agency in others' lives. The humiliation wound develops deep respect for human dignity and worth. Those who experienced shame, public humiliation, or attacks on their inherent value often become gifted at seeing and honoring the worth in every person. Their wound teaches them that everyone carries shame, everyone fears being exposed as inadequate, and everyone needs their dignity honored. They become healers who specialize in helping others overcome shame and discover their inherent worth. These individuals often become therapists specializing in shame healing, coaches who help people embrace self-worth, or leaders who create cultures of respect and dignity. Their humiliation wound becomes a gift for restoring others' sense of value. The invasion wound, whether physical, emotional, or energetic violation, creates powerful boundary setters and protectors. Those whose boundaries were violated develop extraordinary sensitivity to consent, safety, and appropriate limits. Their wound teaches them exactly what healthy boundaries look and feel like, because they learned through violation what happens when boundaries are absent. They become gifted at helping others recognize when their boundaries are being crossed and how to protect themselves. Many trauma therapists, self-defense instructors, and advocates for abuse survivors carry this wound. Their experience of violation becomes their gift for helping others reclaim their personal sovereignty and safety. The loss, grief wound opens profound appreciation for life's preciousness and impermanence. Those who have faced significant loss of loved ones, relationships, or cherished dreams often develop enhanced ability to be present with others' grief and help people appreciate what they have. Their wound of loss becomes a gift for presence and appreciation. They can sit with dying people without flinching, help grieving individuals navigate their pain, and teach others to treasure what they have while they have it. Hospice workers, grief counselors, and spiritual teachers often carry this wound. Their intimate knowledge of loss becomes their capacity to guide others through life's inevitable endings and transitions. Which of these wound types resonates most deeply with your own experience? Often people carry combinations of wounds, creating unique healing gifts that reflect their specific journey through suffering. The key insight Jung discovered is that each wound type represents a different aspect of human suffering that, when consciously integrated, becomes a specific form of healing gift to offer the world. Your wounds weren't random. They were preparing you for precise forms of service that only someone with your particular wound combination could provide. Jung discovered that when we remain unconscious of our wound's sacred purpose, they don't just stay neutral, they become increasingly destructive through 5 escalating stages that can poison our entire existence and harm everyone around us. Stage 1. Wound identification. The most common trap occurs when individuals become so merged with their wounds that they can't imagine themselves without their suffering. The abandonment wound becomes, I am someone who gets abandoned. The betrayal wound becomes, I am someone who can't trust. The rejection wound becomes, I am someone who doesn't belong. Jung observed that these individuals unconsciously sabotage their own healing because recovery would mean losing their sense of identity. They've built their entire personality around their wound story, so healing feels like death of self. They become addicted to their victim narrative because it's the only way they know how to exist in the world. Margaret exemplified this before her transformation. She couldn't imagine herself without her abandonment story because it had become her entire identity. I am broken felt safer than I might be called to something greater than my pain. Stage 2. Wound projection. When wounds remain unconscious, individuals begin unconsciously inflicting their unhealed trauma on others. The abandoned child grows up to abandon their own children. The betrayed person becomes a betrayer. The rejected individual becomes someone who rejects others. This happens not because they're evil, but because unintegrated wounds create unconscious compulsions to recreate familiar dynamics. They become the very thing that wounded them while believing they're protecting themselves or others. The cycle of unconscious harm perpetuates across generations. Jung saw this pattern everywhere. Parents wounding children in the exact ways they were wounded. Partners betraying each other from their own unhealed betrayal wounds. Communities rejecting members from their collective rejection trauma. Unconscious wounds become unconscious weapons. Stage 3. Wound inflation. Some individuals develop grandiosity about their suffering, believing their wounds make them special, superior, or more evolved than others. Their pain becomes a badge of honor that separates them from ordinary people who haven't suffered as much as they have. These individuals use their wound story to establish spiritual or emotional superiority. You couldn't understand. You haven't been through what I've been through. They become competitive about suffering, measuring their worth by how much trauma they've survived. Jung warned that wound inflation is particularly dangerous because it prevents genuine healing while creating a false sense of specialness. These individuals become addicted to being the wounded one, the survivor, the one who's been through the most. Their wound becomes their ego's source of pride and identity. Stage 4. Wound bypassing. This occurs when individuals try to transcend their wounds through spiritual practices or positive thinking without doing the necessary psychological integration work. They create a split between their healed persona and their unprocessed wound material. These people often appear spiritually advanced on the surface while their unconscious wound patterns continue to run their lives beneath the spiritual facade. They talk about forgiveness while harboring deep resentment. They speak of love while unable to trust. They promote healing while avoiding their own pain. Jung observed that spiritual bypassing is particularly seductive because it feels so elevated and enlightened. But it's actually a sophisticated form of avoidance that prevents the deep integration work necessary for authentic transformation. Stage 5. Wound weaponization. The most dangerous stage occurs when individuals use their wounds to manipulate, control, or harm others. They leverage their victim status to avoid responsibility, justify destructive behavior, or extract resources and attention through emotional blackmail and guilt manipulation. These individuals become masters at using their pain to control others. After everything I've been through, how could you? Becomes their go-to manipulation tactic. They use their wound story to justify harmful behavior, avoid accountability, and maintain power over others through guilt and sympathy. Jung saw this as the ultimate perversion of the wound's sacred purpose. Instead of the wound developing gifts for healing others, it becomes a weapon for harming others while maintaining moral superiority. The progression through these stages isn't inevitable, but Jung warned that wounds have a natural tendency toward unconsciousness and shadow expression when they're not consciously integrated. Each stage moves individuals further from discovering their wounds' hidden gifts while creating more suffering for themselves and everyone around them. The tragedy is that at each stage, the person's wound-derived gifts are still present but twisted into destructive forms. The abandonment wound's gift for creating security becomes manipulation for control. The betrayal wound's gift for discernment becomes paranoid suspicion. The rejection wound's gift for inclusion becomes exclusive victim clubs. Jung emphasized that recognizing these danger patterns isn't about shame or judgment. It's about understanding that our wounds have tremendous power that will express itself destructively if we don't consciously channel it toward healing service. The choice isn't whether our wounds will have power in our lives. The choice is whether that power will be used consciously for healing or unconsciously for harm. Which of these stages do you recognize in your own relationship with your deepest wounds? The honest recognition of where you might be stuck is the first step toward discovering the sacred purpose that wants to emerge through your conscious transformation. Jung developed what he called the wounded healer path, a systematic approach to discovering and embodying the divine purpose hidden within our deepest wounds. This wasn't therapy to eliminate wounds, but initiation to transform them into sacred service. Sacred wound recognition is the foundational principle. Jung taught individuals to completely reframe their relationship with their deepest hurts. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" which leads to victim consciousness, the question becomes, "What capacity was this developing in me?" This requires a fundamental shift in perspective. Your abandonment wasn't random cruelty. It was developing your capacity for creating unshakable security. Your betrayal wasn't meaningless suffering. It was training your ability to recognize authentic character. Your rejection wasn't evidence of your unworthiness. It was preparing you to create radical inclusion for others. Jung emphasized that this recognition can't be intellectual. It must be felt in the body as a shift from "I am damaged by this" to "I am prepared by this." The moment this recognition occurs, individuals often experience what Jung called the great reversal. Their greatest shame transforms into their greatest strength. Wound archaeology involves carefully examining the exact nature of your wounds to identify the corresponding gifts. Jung developed specific techniques for this deep exploration. If you were wounded by criticism, you likely developed unusual sensitivity to others' need for encouragement and validation. If wounded by neglect, you probably developed extraordinary attentiveness to others' needs for care and attention. The archaeology process requires examining not just what happened, but what capacities were forced to develop as a result. Jung observed that we always develop the exact opposite quality of what we didn't receive. The unloved child develops profound capacity for love. The powerless child develops extraordinary drive for empowerment. This isn't compensation, it's preparation. Your wound carved in you precisely the capacity that your future service would require. Gift integration requires consciously developing and expressing the capacities that emerged from your wounds. This is where most people get stuck. They recognize their wound-derived gifts, but feel too vulnerable to actually use them in service to others. Jung taught that integration happens through progressive risk-taking. Start small, use your abandonment-derived gift for creating security with one friend. Use your betrayal-derived gift for recognizing authenticity in one relationship. Use your rejection-derived gift for inclusion with one marginalized person. The integration process transforms wounds from sources of shame into sources of power. But Jung warned that this power must be used in service, not for ego inflation. The gifts are not yours to hoard. They're meant to flow through you to heal others. Conscious service involves using your wound-derived gifts, not to prove you're healed, but as an ongoing expression of your authentic nature. Jung emphasized that wounded healers never completely get over their wounds. They learn to serve others through their ongoing relationship with their core vulnerabilities. This is radically different from traditional healing models that aim to eliminate symptoms. Jung discovered that trying to heal from wounds often disconnects us from our gifts. Instead, we heal through wounds by using them in service to others who need exactly what our suffering developed in us. Conscious service keeps wounded healers authentic and humble. They're not helping from a position of superiority, but from intimate knowledge of the terrain they're helping others navigate. Wound wisdom. Teaching develops the ability to help others discover the gifts hidden in their own wounds. Jung observed that wounded healers naturally become guides for others' transformation journey. But this requires careful skill development to avoid inflating their own story or trying to fix others' suffering. The art of wound wisdom teaching involves holding space for others to discover their own wound gift connections, rather than prescribing healing or interpretation. It requires the teacher to remain in ongoing relationship with their own wounds while helping others explore theirs. Sacred suffering integration maintains lifelong relationship with core wounds, not as enemies to be defeated, but as sacred teachers that continue to refine gifts and deepen capacity for service. Jung emphasized that wounded healers never graduate from this work. They become more skilled at dancing with their wounds throughout their lifetime. This integration prevents both spiritual bypassing and wound identification. The wounds remain conscious and available for ongoing teaching, but they don't control the person's identity or limit their capacity for service. Jung's wounded healer path revealed that the goal isn't to heal from our wounds, but to heal through them, discovering that our greatest gifts to the world always emerge from our deepest places of suffering. The path transforms victims into healers, trauma into wisdom, and personal pain into universal service. The wounded healer becomes what Jung called a bridge between worlds, someone who can move fluidly between the realm of suffering and the realm of healing, helping others make that same journey from wound to gift, from victim to healer, from personal pain to sacred service. Jung documented powerful contrasts between individuals who successfully discovered their wound's sacred purpose and those who remained trapped in unconscious suffering. These historical examples reveal the difference between transformation and tragedy when dealing with profound wounding. Ernest Hemingway exemplified tragic failure to integrate wounds consciously. His profound wounds around masculinity, war trauma, and abandonment contained extraordinary gifts for expressing the human condition through literature. His sensitivity to emotional pain, which he experienced as weakness, was actually his genius for capturing universal human experience. Hemingway's abandonment by his mother's emotional withdrawal developed in him profound understanding of how people protect themselves from vulnerability. His war trauma gave him intimate knowledge of how men cope with horror while maintaining dignity. His struggle with masculine identity created deep empathy for human complexity. But Hemingway couldn't integrate these wounds consciously. Instead of recognizing his sensitivity as his gift, he tried to numb it with alcohol. Instead of understanding his emotional wounds as the source of his literary power, he saw them as evidence of his weakness. His gifts remained forever entangled with his suffering rather than transformed through it. The result was alcoholism, depression, and eventual suicide. His wounds never became conscious enough to serve others' healing. They only served his artistic expression while destroying his personal life. Maya Angelou presents the stunning contrast of successful wound integration. Her devastating wounds of childhood sexual abuse, racism, and abandonment could have destroyed her. Instead, she consciously transformed them into extraordinary gifts, for giving voice to the silenced and helping others reclaim their power. Angelou's abuse wound developed in her profound understanding of shame and the healing power of authentic voice. Her racism wounds created unshakable commitment to human dignity. Her abandonment wound birthed extraordinary capacity for creating belonging through storytelling. Angelou consciously integrated these wounds, understanding that her pain prepared her to help others transform their suffering into strength. She became a beacon of hope precisely because she never denied her wounds while refusing to remain trapped by them. Her wounds became conscious resources for service. Vincent van Gogh struggled with profound emotional wounds that generated extraordinary artistic sensitivity and empathy. His mental illness, rejection by society, and deep loneliness could have been recognized as the very qualities that enabled him to see and express beauty that others missed. Van Gogh's sensitivity, which manifested as mental illness, was also his artistic genius. His social rejection gave him intimate knowledge of human suffering. His loneliness developed his profound connection to nature and spiritual reality. But Van Gogh couldn't integrate these gifts consciously during his lifetime. His wounds remained unconscious, expressing themselves through his art, but never becoming resources for helping others heal. He died believing himself a failure, never recognizing that his wounds were developing gifts that would eventually heal millions through his artistic expression. Fred Rogers successfully integrated his childhood wounds around illness, sensitivity, and feeling different into an extraordinary calling to help children feel loved and accepted exactly as they are. His wounds of being sick, different, and emotionally sensitive became his superpowers for connecting with children's inner worlds. Rogers' childhood illness developed his empathy for vulnerability. His sensitivity, which made him different from other boys, became his gift for emotional attunement. His experience of feeling like an outsider created his mission to ensure every child felt valued and included. Rogers consciously transformed his wounds into service, using his intimate knowledge of childhood pain to create healing presents for millions of children. His wounds became conscious resources for helping others, rather than unconscious sources of suffering. Sylvia Plath possessed remarkable wounds around perfectionism, abandonment, and feminine identity that generated profound poetic gifts. Her father's death created abandonment wounds that developed extraordinary sensitivity to loss and grief. Her struggle with perfectionism gave her intimate knowledge of shame and self-criticism. Her battle with feminine identity in a patriarchal world developed fierce insight into women's inner lives. But Plath couldn't find the sacred purpose in her suffering. Her wounds remained unconscious forces that tormented her, rather than conscious gifts she could offer others. Despite her artistic achievements, she couldn't transform her personal pain into healing service, leading to increasing despair and eventual suicide. Helen Keller transformed her profound wounds of blindness and deafness into extraordinary gifts for communication, advocacy, and inspiring others to overcome limitations. Her disabilities forced the development of enhanced perception, determination, and communication abilities that became her gifts to the world. Keller consciously integrated her wounds, understanding that her limitations had developed unique capacities for helping others transcend their own perceived limitations. She became a powerful advocate and inspiration precisely because she transformed her wounds into conscious service. Jung observed that the difference between tragedy and transformation lay not in the severity of wounds, but in the individual's ability to recognize them as sacred territories containing essential gifts for serving the world's healing. Those who succeeded learned to ask, "What is this preparing me for?" rather than, "Why is this happening to me?" They discovered that their wounds weren't obstacles to overcome, but calling to embody. Jung's own wounded healer journey provides the most intimate and powerful example of discovering divine purpose in deep wounds. His transformation from near psychosis to pioneering psychologist reveals the exact process of how wounds become gifts when consciously integrated. Jung's core wounds centered around three devastating experiences that nearly destroyed him before becoming his greatest contributions to humanity. The isolation wound. From childhood, Jung experienced devastating loneliness and felt profoundly different from others. He described feeling like an alien in his own family, carrying what he called secret knowledge about the psychological world that he couldn't share with anyone without being thought insane. This isolation was excruciating. Jung wrote about the terror of being fundamentally alone with perceptions and experiences that others couldn't understand. He felt like he was living in a different reality from everyone around him, creating profound existential loneliness that lasted decades. But this wound was developing in Jung extraordinary sensitivity to unconscious processes and archetypal patterns that others couldn't perceive. His isolation forced him to develop relationship with inner reality when outer relationships felt impossible. What felt like curse was actually preparation for becoming psychology's greatest explorer of the unconscious. The spiritual orphan wound. Jung's father was a pastor who had lost his faith but continued preaching from duty rather than conviction. Jung witnessed his father's religious crisis and subsequent depression, creating in him what he called the wound of spiritual homelessness. Jung lost faith in traditional religious authority while remaining desperately hungry for authentic spiritual connection. He felt betrayed by inherited spirituality while craving direct experience of the sacred. This created profound spiritual anxiety and existential crisis that haunted him for years. This wound was preparing Jung to become a bridge between psychology and spirituality, between scientific inquiry and sacred experience. His spiritual orphaning freed him from conventional religious thinking, allowing him to discover fresh approaches to the divine through psychological exploration. The meaning crisis wound. Perhaps most devastating was what Jung called the wound of meaninglessness, a deep sense that life might be fundamentally pointless and that individual existence might have no ultimate significance. This wasn't philosophical doubt, but existential terror that kept Jung awake at night, wondering if human life was just random suffering without purpose or direction. The meaninglessness wound created periods of deep depression and despair that threatened his sanity. These wounds intensified dramatically during Jung's famous psychological breakdown from 1913-1919, when he felt he was living in a lunatic asylum of his own making. He experienced visions, voices, and psychological states that threatened to destroy his career and his sanity. Jung described this period, "I was menaced by a psychosis. I was living in a constant state of tension. Often I felt as if gigantic blocks of stone were tumbling down upon me." He believed he was going insane and worried that his strange experiences would destroy his credibility as a psychiatrist. But gradually, Jung began to realize that his breakdown was actually a breakthrough. His wounds were revealing their sacred purpose. The great reversal began when Jung started actively engaging with his visions and voices instead of trying to eliminate them. He discovered that his isolation wound had developed in him the ability to navigate psychological territories that others found terrifying. His comfort with solitude allowed him to explore inner realms that required courage most people didn't possess. His spiritual orphan wound had freed him to discover direct experience of archetypal energies without religious dogma limiting his exploration. His loss of inherited faith allowed him to become an authentic spiritual pioneer, mapping territories that conventional religion couldn't access. His meaning crisis wound had developed in him unshakable commitment to helping others discover personal meaning through relationship with the unconscious. His own terror of meaninglessness became his passion for helping others find purpose through psychological exploration. The Red Book period, Jung's detailed recording of his visions and psychological experiences during his breakdown, became his greatest contribution to human understanding of how the psyche heals itself. What he initially experienced as near psychosis revealed itself as profound wisdom about psychological transformation. Jung realized that his wounds had sculpted him into exactly the person the world needed to bridge psychology and spirituality for future generations. His isolation prepared him to work alone with dangerous psychological material. His spiritual homelessness prepared him to create new approaches to the sacred. His meaning crisis prepared him to help others discover authentic purpose. Integration and service. Jung spent the rest of his life consciously using his wound-derived gifts to help others navigate their own psychological and spiritual crises. His intimate knowledge of breakdown became his expertise in breakthrough. His experience of meaninglessness became his ability to help others find meaning. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." He discovered that his wounds hadn't been punishments or obstacles. They had been preparing him for his essential service to human consciousness evolution. His personal transformation demonstrates that our deepest wounds, when consciously integrated, become our greatest gifts, not just to our own healing, but to collective healing. Jung's wounds became humanity's resources for understanding how individual psychological work contributes to species evolution. Jung's journey proves that the wounded healer path isn't just personal therapy. It's a sacred calling to transform individual suffering into collective wisdom, personal breakdown into universal breakthrough, private pain into public service. Jung developed specific practices for discovering and embodying the divine purpose hidden in our wounds. These aren't therapeutic techniques to eliminate pain, but initiation tools to transform suffering into service. The Sacred Wound Inventory is Jung's foundational practice for wound gift recognition. Take your 3 deepest wounds, the experiences that shaped you most profoundly, and examine them with curiosity rather than shame. For each wound, ask, what did this teach me about human suffering that others who haven't experienced this wouldn't know? What capacities did I have to develop to survive this experience? How did this wound make me sensitive to others' pain in ways I wouldn't be otherwise? Write detailed responses looking for the hidden gifts your wounds developed. The abandonment wound taught you exactly what people need to feel secure. The betrayal wound developed your ability to recognize authentic character. The rejection wound created your passion for inclusion. Jung emphasized that this inventory must be done without trying to heal or fix the wounds. You're not examining them to eliminate them, but to discover what they've been trying to give you all along. Wound gift mapping creates detailed connections between specific wound experiences and corresponding healing capacities. Jung observed that the mapping must be precise. General wounds create general gifts, but specific wounds create specific superpowers. Create a detailed map. When I was abandoned at age 7 by my father's sudden departure, I developed hypervigilance about people leaving, which became my gift for recognizing when others feel unsafe in relationships and knowing exactly how to create security for them. The mapping reveals how your particular combination of wounds has prepared you for unique forms of service that only you can provide. Your wound constellation is unlike anyone else's, creating healing gifts that are uniquely yours. The Wounded Healer Meditation teaches you to consciously connect with your wound energy while simultaneously accessing the gifts that emerged from it. Jung discovered that trying to heal from wounds disconnects us from our gifts, but healing through wounds integrates them consciously. In meditation, bring to awareness your core wound. Feel it fully without trying to fix or eliminate it. Then consciously connect with the capacity this wound developed in you. Feel both simultaneously, the wound that still exists and the gift that emerged through it. This practice prevents both spiritual bypassing, trying to transcend wounds, and wound identification, becoming trapped by wounds. You learn to hold both your vulnerability and your power simultaneously. Purpose through pain. Writing uses journaling to explore how your wounds might be calling you toward specific forms of service. Jung taught that wounds contain wisdom about where they want to be expressed in the world. Write letters to your wounds, asking them directly, what do you want to contribute to the world's healing through my life and work? What kind of service are you preparing me for? Who needs exactly what you've taught me about suffering and healing? Allow your wounds to respond through your writing. Jung discovered that wounds have their own intelligence about their intended purpose when we stop trying to eliminate them and start listening to their guidance. Wounded service. Experiments involve small, low-risk experiments in using your wound-derived gifts to help others. Jung emphasized that integration happens through action, not just understanding. If your abandonment wound developed gifts for creating security, experiment with using this gift with one friend who seems anxious about being wanted. If your betrayal wound developed discernment about authenticity, practice helping someone recognize whether someone in their life is trustworthy. Start small and notice how it feels to serve from your authentic wounds rather than from your ego's ideas about how you should help others. Wound-based service feels different, more natural, more powerful, more connected to your authentic nature. Shadow gift integration examines the gifts you're afraid to acknowledge because they're connected to your wounds. Jung observed that we often resist our greatest gifts because they remind us of our greatest pain. List the capacities you possess but feel uncomfortable claiming, I'm unusually good at recognizing when people are lying. I have extraordinary ability to help people feel safe. I can sense when someone is about to abandon a relationship. These shadow gifts are often your most powerful healing capacities, but you've hidden them because they're connected to painful wound experiences. Integration requires owning these gifts consciously instead of letting them operate unconsciously. Wound Wisdom Council creates an imaginal dialogue between your current self and your wounded aspects. Jung used active imagination to allow wounded parts to teach about their sacred purpose. Imagine sitting in council with your wounded aspects, your abandoned child, your betrayed adolescent, your rejected teenager. Ask them what they've learned, what gifts they've developed, what they want to contribute through your adult life. Allow these wounded aspects to be teachers rather than problems to be solved. They often have wisdom about service and purpose that your adult rational mind can't access. Authentic service calibration helps distinguish between serving from wound-derived gifts, which feels energizing and authentic, versus serving from wound compulsion, which feels depleting and inauthentic. True wounded healer service feels natural and energizing because you're using gifts that developed organically through your experience. Compulsive service feels draining because you're trying to heal your own wounds through helping others. Learn to recognize the difference. Authentic service flows from integrated wounds. Compulsive service flows from unintegrated wounds, trying to heal themselves through others. Jung emphasized that these practices aren't about eliminating wounds, but about discovering how to live and serve from the integrated wholeness that includes both wounding and the gifts that emerged through it. The goal is not to become invulnerable, but to become what Jung called consciously wounded, aware of your wounds as sacred, teachers that continue to refine your capacity for service throughout your lifetime. Jung identified 5 distinct stages individuals pass through when discovering the divine purpose hidden in their wounds. Understanding these stages helps you navigate your own transformation and recognize where you might be stuck in the process. Stage 1. Wound awareness occurs when individuals first recognize their deepest wounds, not as random suffering, but as significant psychological events that fundamentally shaped their development and capacity for perception. This stage is often triggered by crisis, therapy, spiritual awakening, or simply reaching a point where you can't continue living unconsciously. Suddenly, you begin seeing your wounds with new eyes. questioning the story you've told yourself about your suffering. For Margaret, this stage came when she first walked into Jung's office and began recognizing that her abandonment wasn't just something that happened to her. It was something that had profoundly shaped who she became. She started noticing that her relationship problems weren't random but followed specific patterns connected to her core wound. The awareness stage requires courage because it means taking responsibility for how your wounds have influenced your entire life. It means recognizing that your wounds aren't just past events, but living forces that continue to shape your perceptions, reactions, and choices. Many people resist this stage because wound awareness can initially feel overwhelming. You mean this abandonment wound has been running my entire adult life? You mean my betrayal wound is why I can't trust anyone? The scope of wound influence can feel daunting, but Jung observed that awareness is liberation. Once you recognize your wounds consciously, they stop controlling you unconsciously. You can begin making conscious choices about how to work with them. Stage 2. Gift recognition involves the shocking realization that your wounds actually developed extraordinary capacities in you that most people don't possess. This stage often comes with a sense of disbelief and grief. People wounded by abandonment suddenly recognize their unusual loyalty and commitment abilities. Those betrayed discover their sophisticated wisdom about trust and authenticity. Rejection-wounded individuals see their profound gift for inclusion and acceptance. Jung called this the great reversal because it completely flips your relationship with your deepest pain. What you thought was your greatest weakness reveals itself as your greatest strength. What you believed made you broken reveals itself as what makes you uniquely gifted. This stage is often accompanied by grief for the years spent hiding, devaluing, or trying to eliminate these wound-derived gifts. Margaret cried for weeks when she realized that her abandonment issues were actually extraordinary gifts for creating security that she had been trying to therapy away for years. The grief is necessary because you're mourning the years of misunderstanding your own nature. You're grieving the time spent trying to become normal when your wounds had made you exceptionally gifted in specific ways. Many people get stuck in gift recognition because the gifts feel too vulnerable to claim or too connected to pain to celebrate. But Jung emphasized that avoiding your gifts keeps you trapped in victim consciousness. Stage 3. Purpose connection represents the profound moment when individuals realize their wounds prepared them for specific forms of service, that their particular combination of wounds and gifts points toward a unique calling that only they can fulfill. This stage often comes with what Jung called the sense of divine orchestration, a feeling that your suffering wasn't random but was preparing you for essential service. Margaret experienced this when she realized her abandonment wound had prepared her specifically to revolutionize foster care for displaced children. The purpose connection stage transforms your entire relationship with your life story. Your wounds stop being things that happened to you and become experiences that happened for you, preparing you for your essential contribution to collective healing. Jung observed that this stage often brings tears of recognition, as if your soul is finally being seen and acknowledged. People frequently report feeling like their entire life suddenly makes sense, as if all the pieces of a cosmic puzzle have fallen into place. But this stage can also bring terror, because recognizing your wound-based calling means acknowledging that you can't keep hiding from your gifts or playing small. Your wounds are calling you to step fully into your power in service to others' healing. Stage 4. Integrated service involves beginning to serve others from your wound-derived gifts while maintaining conscious connection to your own wounds. This is where theory becomes embodied practice. Jung emphasized that integrated service is radically different from helper syndrome or savior complex. You're not serving others to prove you're healed or to heal your own wounds through fixing others. You're serving from the gifts that naturally emerged through your wound integration. Margaret entered this stage when she began working with foster children, using her abandonment wound as a conscious resource for recognizing children's attachment needs and creating healing environments for them. Her wound wasn't something she had overcome. It was something she was serving through. This stage requires ongoing attention to maintaining authenticity and avoiding inflation. The temptation is to become identified with the healer role and lose touch with your own ongoing woundedness and need for healing. Integrated service feels different from other forms of helping. It's energizing rather than depleting because you're using gifts that developed naturally through your experience. You're helping others with something you have intimate knowledge about rather than trying to help with something you've only studied theoretically. Stage 5. Wounded healer mastery emerges when individuals can fluidly move between receiving healing for their own wounds and offering healing to others through their gifts. Jung called this the sacred marriage between wounded humanity and divine purpose. At this stage, you recognize that your wounds will never be completely healed in the conventional sense, but will continue refining your capacity for service throughout your lifetime. Your wounds become ongoing teachers that deepen your gifts and keep you authentic in your service to others. Margaret reached this mastery when she could simultaneously receive support for her own abandonment triggers while using her abandonment-derived gifts to help children heal their attachment wounds. She understood that her wound and her gift were permanently married and that trying to separate them would diminish both. Wounded healer mastery involves what Jung called conscious suffering, the ability to remain in relationship with your core wounds, not as problems to be solved, but as sacred teachers that continue to evolve your capacity for compassion and service. At this stage, you become what Jung termed a bridge between worlds, someone who can move fluidly between the realm of wounding and the realm of healing, helping others make the same journey from victim to healer, from personal pain to sacred service. The mastery stage never ends because wounds continue teaching and gifts continue evolving. But you've learned to dance with both your vulnerability and your power, using them in integrated service to something greater than your personal healing. Which stage resonates most with where you are in your own wound-to-purpose journey? Understanding your current stage helps you know what work is needed to continue your transformation from wounded victim to wounded healer. Jung identified 4 critical pitfalls that can derail the wound-to-purpose transformation, each requiring careful navigation and ongoing vigilance to avoid unconsciously sabotaging your journey from wounded victim to wounded healer. The wound inflation trap is perhaps the most seductive and dangerous pitfall because it feels so spiritually justified. This occurs when individuals become grandiose about their wounds or the gifts derived from them, believing their suffering makes them special, superior, or more evolved than others. Jung observed this pattern repeatedly. Someone discovers that their abandonment wound developed extraordinary gifts for creating security, and suddenly they believe they're more gifted than people who weren't abandoned. Or someone realizes their betrayal wound created sophisticated discernment about authenticity, and they become arrogant about their ability to see through others. The wound inflation trap leads to spiritual pride and unconscious harm to those you claim to serve. You start believing you're more evolved because you've suffered more, or that your wound-derived gifts make you superior to people with different gifts or different wounds. Margaret almost fell into this trap when she first discovered her abandonment-derived gifts. She began feeling superior to other social workers who didn't understand abandonment like she did, and started judging parents who struggled with attachment as not getting it the way she did. Jung warned that wound inflation is particularly dangerous because it prevents authentic service while maintaining the illusion of spiritual advancement. You're using your gifts to establish superiority rather than to create healing, which corrupts both the gifts and your capacity for genuine service. Premature service syndrome happens when individuals try to help others heal from wounds they haven't yet integrated themselves. This creates what Jung called the blind leading the blind, wounded people trying to heal other wounded people while still unconscious of their own wound patterns. Jung observed this constantly in therapeutic relationships, where therapists try to heal clients from wounds the therapist hasn't yet processed. The therapist unconsciously projects their own unhealed material onto the client, creating boundary violations, therapeutic ruptures, and mutual wounding. Margaret experienced this early in her social work career, when she tried to help foster children before she had consciously integrated her own abandonment wound. Her unprocessed trauma got triggered by the children's abandonment, leading to overprotective behavior that prevented the children from developing their own resilience. Premature service feels compulsive and depleting because you're not truly serving others. You're unconsciously trying to heal your own wounds through fixing others. This creates codependent dynamics that prevent both you and those you're trying to help from developing authentic strength. Jung emphasized that authentic wounded healer service requires ongoing attention to your own wound integration. You must remain a student of your own healing process while serving as a guide for others' healing journeys. The savior complex develops when individuals become addicted to rescuing others from the same wounds they experienced. This feels noble and justified, but it creates unhealthy dependency relationships that prevent genuine healing and growth. The savior complex emerges from unconscious guilt about having survived or healed when others haven't. I escaped abandonment, so I must save everyone from abandonment. I healed from betrayal, so I must protect everyone from betrayal. This compulsive rescuing prevents others from developing their own strength and wisdom. Jung saw this pattern in many wounded healers who couldn't tolerate seeing others suffer from similar wounds. Their helper role became a way to maintain superiority and avoid their own ongoing vulnerability. They needed others to remain wounded so they could continue being the rescuer. Margaret struggled with this when she first began working with foster children. She wanted to protect them from every possible abandonment experience rather than helping them develop resilience and discover their own abandonment-derived gifts. Her rescuing prevented the children from growing through their challenges. The savior complex is particularly insidious because it feels so loving and caring. But Jung observed that authentic love sometimes requires allowing others to struggle and develop their own strength rather than rescuing them from all difficulty. Wound bypassing occurs when individuals focus so intensely on their wound's sacred purpose that they avoid dealing with the genuine pain and trauma that still needs healing attention. They use spiritual meaning-making to avoid necessary psychological work. Jung warned against using the wound-to-purpose framework to skip over the real grief, anger, fear, and pain that wounds contain. My abandonment was preparing me for service can become a way to avoid feeling the terror and rage that abandonment created. My betrayal taught me discernment can become a way to avoid processing the heartbreak and trust issues that betrayal caused. Wound bypassing creates a split between your purposeful identity and your unprocessed emotional material. You can speak eloquently about your wound's sacred purpose while still being triggered unconsciously by wound-related situations. Margaret experienced this when she first discovered her wound's purpose. She became so excited about her abandonment-derived gifts that she stopped feeling the pain of her actual abandonment experiences. This created emotional numbness that limited both her personal healing and her capacity for authentic service. Jung emphasized that finding purpose in wounds doesn't eliminate the need for grief work, trauma processing, and emotional healing. The purpose framework should enhance therapeutic work, not replace it. The key to avoiding these pitfalls is maintaining what Jung called conscious humility, remaining aware that you're a wounded human being whose gifts happen to serve others' healing, not a superior being whose wounds make you special. Authentic wounded healers stay connected to their own ongoing need for healing while offering their gifts in service. They understand that their wounds are both their greatest vulnerabilities and their greatest strengths, and they hold both aspects with equal consciousness. Regular supervision, ongoing therapy, spiritual practice, and honest feedback from trusted others help wounded healers stay conscious of these pitfalls and continue their own growth while serving others' healing. Which of these pitfalls feels most relevant to your own journey? Honest recognition of where you might be vulnerable helps you navigate these dangers and continue authentic transformation. Margaret's complete transformation illustrates the profound possibility available when we discover and embody the divine purpose hiding in our deepest wounds. Her journey from abandoned child to pioneering wounded healer demonstrates how the exact experiences that nearly destroyed us can become our greatest contributions to healing the world. After 2 years of intensive analytical work with Jung, Margaret had moved through all 5 stages of wound-to-purpose transformation. Her abandonment wound was no longer something that happened to her. It had become her calling made manifest through conscious service. Margaret discovered that every foster home experience had taught her something essential about what displaced children need to feel safe and develop resilience. Every abandonment had refined her sensitivity to subtle signs that a child was feeling unwanted or insecure. Every rejection had strengthened her commitment to ensuring that vulnerable children experience genuine belonging. She realized that her nervous system's hypervigilance around abandonment wasn't pathology to be medicated away. It was divine radar for detecting when children needed the specific type of security she had learned to create through her own healing journey. Margaret's transformation culminated when she established what became known as the Healing Homes Project, a revolutionary approach to foster care that transformed how society understands and supports displaced children. Instead of traditional foster care that focuses primarily on meeting children's basic needs, Margaret's program was designed around helping children discover the gifts that their abandonment and displacement experiences were developing in them. She understood that abandoned children don't just need homes. They need to understand how their wounds are preparing them for unique forms of service. Margaret trained foster parents to recognize that challenging behaviors often indicated emerging gifts. The child who was hypervigilant about safety was developing gifts for protecting others. The child who tested attachment constantly was developing gifts for creating unshakable loyalty. The child who seemed too sensitive was developing gifts for emotional attunement and healing. Her revolutionary insight was that healing happens not when we eliminate the effects of abandonment, but when we help children discover how their abandonment experiences are developing capacities that the world desperately needs. The results were extraordinary. Children in Margaret's program showed dramatically better outcomes, not just in terms of behavioral stability and academic achievement, but in terms of discovering meaning and purpose in their difficult experiences. They began seeing themselves not as damaged victims, but as wounded healers in training. Many of these children grew up to become teachers, social workers, therapists, and advocates, using their abandonment-derived gifts to help other vulnerable populations. Margaret's program created a generation of conscious wounded healers who understood their childhood trauma as preparation for adult service. Margaret's approach spread internationally, influencing foster care practices across multiple countries. She wrote extensively about her methods, always emphasizing that her insights came not from academic theory, but from her own lived experience of transforming abandonment into gift. In her final journal entries, written shortly before her death at age 89, Margaret reflected on her journey. "I now understand that I was never truly abandoned. Every loss, every rejection, every moment of feeling unwanted was preparing me to ensure that other children would never feel as alone as I once did. My wounds weren't punishment from an uncaring universe. They were my calling being carved into my soul through the precise experiences necessary to develop my unique capacity for service. I couldn't have helped children heal from abandonment without having survived abandonment myself. Jung helped me see that the question isn't, why did this happen to me, but what is this preparing me for? When I shifted from victim consciousness to purpose consciousness, everything changed. My greatest wound became my greatest gift, and my deepest pain became my most profound contribution." Margaret's transformation demonstrates Jung's revolutionary insight that our wounds aren't obstacles to our purpose. They are our purpose, waiting to be discovered and consciously embodied in service to collective healing. Her legacy lives on in thousands of children who learn to see their wounds as sacred preparation for their unique contributions to the world's healing. She proved that when we discover the divine purpose hiding in our deepest wounds, we don't just heal ourselves, we become resources for healing others who carry similar wounds. Margaret's story reveals the profound truth Jung discovered. The wounded healer path isn't about transcending our humanity, but about serving through it, using our deepest vulnerabilities as our greatest strengths in service to love. Her transformation from abandoned child to international advocate demonstrates that no wound is too deep, no abandonment too complete, no rejection too devastating to contain the seeds of profound purpose and sacred service. Margaret became living proof that our greatest wounds, when consciously integrated, become our greatest gifts to humanity's healing and evolution. Jung believed that individuals who discover the divine purpose in their wounds serve a crucial function in humanity's psychological and spiritual evolution, becoming what he called wounded healers who help transform collective suffering into collective wisdom. In our current era of widespread trauma, anxiety, depression, and spiritual crisis, wounded healers have become essential bridges between suffering and meaning. They demonstrate through their own transformation that healing doesn't require eliminating wounds, but rather discovering how to serve through them. Living proof of possibility, wounded healers serve as walking demonstrations that no wound is meaningless, no suffering is wasted, and every form of human pain contains seeds of healing capacity for the world. Their existence challenges the cultural narrative that trauma only damages and destroys. When someone who has transformed abandonment into gifts for creating security works with abandoned children, those children see living proof that their wounds aren't permanent damage, but preparation for unique service. When someone who has integrated betrayal trauma becomes a relationship therapist, clients see evidence that betrayal wounds can become wisdom about authentic connection. Jung observed that wounded healers naturally create what he called healing fields, environments where others feel safe to explore their own wounds and discover their hidden purposes. This happens because wounded healers carry no judgment about suffering and maintain authentic connection to their own ongoing healing process. Unlike helpers who try to fix others from a position of superiority, wounded healers serve from intimate knowledge of the terrain they're helping others navigate. This creates safety for vulnerable people to explore their own wound-to-purpose journey without shame or pressure to be different than they are. Normalizing the wound-to-purpose journey. The presence of integrated wounded healers in communities, families, and organizations helps normalize the idea that wounds can become gifts. This makes it safer for others to examine their own pain for hidden treasures, rather than simply trying to eliminate or transcend their suffering. Margaret's presence in the foster care system changed how everyone involved, social workers, foster parents, and children themselves, understood abandonment and displacement. Instead of seeing these experiences as purely traumatic, they began recognizing them as potential preparation for unique forms of service. Jung emphasized that wounded healers contribute to what he called the healing of the collective soul, humanity's gradual integration of its shadow material and transformation of suffering into wisdom. Each individual who discovers purpose in their wounds contributes to collective consciousness, shifting from viewing pain as meaningless to recognizing it as raw material for developing compassion and service capacities. Evolving consciousness. As more individuals discover the sacred purpose in their wounds, collective consciousness gradually evolves beyond victim-perpetrator dynamics toward what Jung called conscious suffering, the ability to transform pain into wisdom, rather than simply perpetuating cycles of unconscious harm. Wounded healers demonstrate that the evolutionary response to trauma isn't revenge or avoidance, but conscious integration that transforms personal wounding into collective healing resources. They show that we can break generational cycles of unconscious harm by discovering the gifts that our wounds were meant to develop. Jung believed that wounded healers are essential for humanity's next evolutionary step, learning to transform suffering consciously rather than unconsciously perpetuating trauma through projection, reaction, and retaliation. Creating healing culture in organizations and communities where wounded healers are present and conscious, the entire culture shifts toward greater emotional intelligence, authentic vulnerability, and service orientation. These environments become what Jung called containers for transformation, where people feel safe to explore their own wound-to-purpose journey. Educational institutions with conscious wounded healers on staff create safer environments for students to explore their own gifts and challenges. Healthcare organizations with integrated wounded healers provide more holistic and compassionate care. Businesses with conscious wounded healers in leadership develop more ethical and service-oriented practices. Collective shadow integration. Jung observed that wounded healers help societies integrate collective shadow material by demonstrating that what we try to hide, deny, or eliminate often contains essential wisdom and gifts. They help communities face difficult truths about systemic wounding while discovering how collective wounds can become collective strengths. Communities that have experienced collective trauma, war, natural disasters, systemic oppression, can discover collective gifts through conscious integration. Communities that have survived war often develop profound wisdom about peace. Communities that have faced natural disasters often develop extraordinary capacity for mutual aid and resilience. Wounded healers help facilitate this collective integration by demonstrating through their individual journey how wounds can be transformed into gifts for collective benefit rather than remaining sources of collective shame or trauma. Future evolution. Jung believed that as more individuals discover the wound-to-purpose path, humanity will gradually develop what he called conscious suffering, the ability to transform pain into wisdom while it's happening rather than remaining unconscious to the gifts that difficulties are developing. This doesn't mean seeking suffering or glorifying trauma, but rather developing the capacity to recognize the hidden gifts in challenging experiences as they unfold. Future humans might be able to consciously collaborate with difficulties to develop intended capacities rather than simply enduring suffering unconsciously. The wounded healer path demonstrates that individual healing and collective healing are inseparable. Each person's wound-to-purpose transformation contributes to humanity's overall capacity for wisdom, compassion, and conscious evolution. Jung envisioned a future where societies understand that their collective wounds, wars, injustices, disasters contain essential wisdom for developing collective capacities needed for the next stage of human evolution. Wounded healers are the pioneers mapping this territory for the rest of humanity. Their service isn't just personal healing work, it's evolutionary work that helps our species learn to transform suffering consciously, break cycles of unconscious harm, and discover the gifts hiding in even the most difficult collective experiences. If you recognize yourself carrying deep wounds that have shaped your life, Jung would want you to know something that will change everything. Your pain has not been meaningless. Your suffering has not been wasted. Your wounds are not evidence that you're broken. Your deepest wounds are the exact places where your soul's purpose is trying to break through into consciousness. They are not obstacles to your calling. They are your calling, waiting to be discovered and embodied in service to something greater than your personal healing. The capacities you developed through your deepest pain are precisely what humanity needs from you, not despite your wounds, but because of them. Your abandonment wound developed your gifts for creating security. Your betrayal wound developed your wisdom about authenticity. Your rejection wound developed your passion for inclusion. Your powerlessness wound developed your commitment to empowerment. These aren't consolation prizes for your suffering. These are your soul's intended contributions to collective healing, developed through the precise experiences necessary to refine these capacities in you to their highest expression. Jung's legacy reveals that the wounded healer path is not about transcending your humanity, but about serving through it. It's not about proving you're healed or achieving invulnerability. It's about offering your gifts to others while maintaining authentic connection to your own ongoing healing process. Your sacred assignment: begin by examining your 3 deepest wounds with curiosity rather than shame. Ask what each one taught you about human suffering that others without this experience wouldn't understand. Notice how your wounds have made you exquisitely sensitive to others' similar pain and gifted at providing exactly what you most needed but didn't receive. Your wound-derived gifts are not theoretical concepts, but lived capacities that you've been developing your entire life. The person abandoned in childhood who becomes extraordinarily loyal. The person betrayed by trusted others who develops sophisticated discernment about character. The person rejected for their authentic nature who becomes a fierce advocate for authenticity in others. The recognition. Allow yourself to recognize that your particular combination of wounds and gifts is unlike anyone else's. No one else has walked your exact path through suffering, which means no one else has developed your exact combination of healing capacities. The world needs your specific understanding of how to transform your particular forms of pain into service.